What if I told you that the Hilton down the street, Hilton probably doesn't own it, and the Marriott across from it, Marriott doesn't own that one either. In fact, these giant hotel companies with thousands of properties and their names plastered on buildings in every city on earth own almost none of them. Marriott owns less than 1% of its more than 9,000 locations. Hilton owns about 3%. The rest? Owned by people you've never heard of. Maybe a dentist in Ohio, maybe a real estate fund, maybe someone exactly like you if you ever decided to take the plunge. So today we're going to answer a deceptively simple question. What is the actual economics of owning a hotel? How much does it cost to build one? How do they make money? How much money? And why on earth would the biggest names in the business go out of their way to not own the very buildings that carry their name? Stick around, because that last part is the twist that makes this whole industry make sense. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about the price of admission, because it is steep. Building a hotel is one of the most capital-intensive things you can do in real estate. According to the HVS U.S. Hotel Development Cost Survey, the median cost to build a hotel in America comes out to around $219,000 per room. Per room. And that number swings wildly depending on what kind of hotel you're building. At the budget end, a limited service hotel, think a roadside place with a lobby, some vending machines, and not much else, runs about $167,000 per room. Move up to select service, the kind of place with a small gym and free breakfast, and you're looking at roughly $223,000 per room. Full-service hotels with restaurants and event space jump to around $409,000 per room. And luxury? Buckle up. The median luxury hotel costs over $1 million per room to build, and in some markets, it can balloon to $2 million per room. Let that sink in. A 100-room luxury hotel could cost you $100 million or more before a single guest ever checks in. Even a modest 100-room select service hotel is a $16 to $22 million project. This is why building a hotel isn't a solo hobby. It's a coalition of investors, banks, and developers, all betting that people will keep needing places to sleep. And that upfront number is just the building. There's the land, which can be anywhere from 9 to 25% of the total budget, depending on whether you're in rural Arizona or downtown Manhattan. There's what the industry calls FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Every bed, desk, lamp, and TV, which can eat up another chunk of the budget. There are soft costs, the architects, engineers, permits, and lawyers, which can run 30 to 40% of the whole project. And then there are pre-opening costs, because you have to hire and train your entire staff and start marketing before you've earned a single dollar. Okay, so the hotel is built, the doors are open. Now, how does it actually make money? This is where hotel economics gets its own secret language. And once you learn 3 little acronyms, you'll understand the entire business better than most people who stay in hotels their whole lives. The first is ADR, average daily rate. That's simply the average price a guest pays for a room per night. In the United States, the average ADR recently sat at around $160 a night, though that ranges from under $90 for a mid-scale room to over $330 a night in New York City. The second acronym is occupancy, which is exactly what it sounds like. What percentage of your rooms are filled on any given night? The national average recently hovered around 62 to 63%, which means on a typical night, more than a third of America's hotel rooms are sitting empty. Empty rooms are the enemy. We'll come back to why that matters so much. And the third acronym, the one that ties it all together, is RevPAR, revenue per available room. This is the magic number. You get it by multiplying your average daily rate by your occupancy. So if your rooms go for $160 and you're 62% full, your RevPAR is right around $100. And that's almost exactly where the US average has been sitting, right around $100 to $103 per available room. Here's why RevPAR is the number that keeps hotel owners up at night. It captures both levers at once. You can have a hotel that's completely full, 100% occupancy, and still be losing money if you filled those rooms by slashing your prices to the bone. Or you can have a half-empty hotel that's wildly profitable because the rooms you did sell went for a premium. A full hotel is not automatically a good hotel. As one industry saying goes, you can't pay your mortgage with occupancy. You pay it with revenue. Now, here's a genuinely counterintuitive fact that most people would never guess. You might assume the goal is to get your hotel as close to 100% full as possible. But the data actually shows that profitability peaks somewhere around 65 to 70% occupancy. Past that point, you hit diminishing returns because every additional room you sell comes with real costs. More cleaning, more laundry, more front desk labor, more wear and tear, and eventually the cost of serving those last few guests starts eating into your margins. The smartest operators would often rather sell a room for $200 than sell 2 rooms for $100 each. Same revenue, half the work, half the cost. So let's talk about where the money actually comes from inside the building, because it's not just the rooms. On average, a hotel's rooms department accounts for about 68% of total revenue. The other 32% comes from everything else: the restaurant and bar, parking, the spa, meeting and event space, and what the industry lovingly calls miscellaneous income, which is basically all the fees. Resort fees, early check-in fees, that kind of thing. And here's the beautiful part for owners. A lot of that fee income has almost no cost attached to it, so it flows straight to the bottom line. At luxury hotels, the mix shifts dramatically. Rooms might only account for around 70% of revenue because food and beverage, spas, and events become huge business. That's also why luxury hotels are so much more expensive and complicated to run. More revenue streams, but also far more staff and far more ways to lose money. Which brings us to the part nobody warns you about. The costs never stop. This is fundamentally different from a lot of other businesses. A hotel has enormous fixed costs: the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and a baseline of staff that you owe whether you're at 90% occupancy or 40%. Here's the brutal math of it. A hotel at 40% occupancy pays basically the same fixed costs as a hotel at 90% occupancy, but brings in less than half the revenue. That's called operating leverage, and it cuts both ways. In good times, when you're full, that leverage creates enormous profit. In bad times, when demand dries up, that same leverage creates catastrophic losses. It's why hotels are considered one of the most economically sensitive businesses out there. When the economy sneezes, hotels catch a cold. And then there's labor, which has become the single biggest headache in the industry. Hotels are brutally labor-intensive. Someone has to clean every room, staff every desk, cook every breakfast, and labor costs have exploded. Recently, hotel labor cost per occupied room hit around $7.32, up 9% in a single year. Housekeeping, the hardest role in the industry to keep staffed, has seen wages climb steadily. Hotel wages overall are up more than 25% compared to before the pandemic. And with a workforce that turns over faster than almost any other industry, owners are constantly hiring and training just to stay in place. So after all of this, the building, the staff, the taxes, the endless costs, what does the owner actually take home? Here's where a lot of people are surprised. Hotels are not the money printing machines they might appear to be. There are 2 numbers you need to understand. The first is gross operating profit, which is what's left after you pay the day-to-day operating costs, but before the big ownership expenses like the mortgage. That number looks healthy, often in the mid to high 30s as a percentage of revenue. Recently, the industry average gross operating profit margin was around 38%. And if you stopped there, you'd think hotels are incredibly lucrative, but then you layer in the ownership costs, the debt service, the loan payments on that $100 million building, the property taxes, the insurance, the money you have to set aside every year for renovations, because a tired hotel loses guests fast. And once all of that gets subtracted, the net profit margin, the real bottom line, the money that actually reaches the owner's pocket, compresses down to somewhere around 8 to 10% for a typical hotel. 10% on a business that costs you tens of millions of dollars and demands constant hands-on management. And that's for a well-run property. Get the location wrong, mismanage your costs, or hit a bad year, and that thin margin can vanish entirely or go negative. In fact, when you look at tax data from before the pandemic, the average hotel actually showed a small net loss on paper, once you factor in depreciation. The reason owners still make money is a combination of that depreciation being a non-cash expense, meaning it's a tax deduction that doesn't actually cost you cash, and the property itself appreciating in value over time. So a big part of the hotel investment thesis isn't even the annual profit. It's that you're building equity in a valuable piece of real estate that ideally is worth more when you sell it than when you bought it. On the investment side, the typical return investors hope for is somewhere in the range of 6 to 12% per year, with budget properties on the lower end and luxury on the higher end, but with much bigger risk. Now we come back to the twist I promised you at the beginning. If hotels are this expensive to build, this hard to run, this sensitive to the economy, and this thin on margins, why do Marriott and Hilton and Hyatt exist as some of the most valuable, profitable companies in the entire travel industry? Because they figured out the smartest move of all: let someone else own the building. This is called the asset-light model, and honestly, it's one of the cleverest business pivots in modern corporate history. Think of it like software as a service, but for buildings. Some people have started calling it brand as a service. Here's how it works. Marriott and Hilton and the others realized that the risky, capital-intensive, low-margin part of the business is owning the physical hotel, so they got out of it almost entirely. Instead, they sell their brand. An independent owner, that dentist in Ohio, that real estate fund, builds the hotel with their own money and takes on all that risk we just talked about. Then they pay Marriott or Hilton for the right to hang the sign out front, to plug into the global reservation system, and to access the loyalty program with its hundreds of millions of members. And for all of that, the owner pays the brand a franchise fee that typically runs somewhere between 5 and 15% of the property's revenue. Think about what that means. The brand company collects a percentage of revenue off the top without owning the building, without paying the mortgage, without hiring the housekeepers, without absorbing the losses in a bad year. They take a clean, high-margin cut while the owner shoulders the real estate risk. Hilton's own leadership describes it as a fee-based, capital-light business. And in the US, Hilton is over 90% franchised. Marriott is around 75 to 80% franchised, owning less than 1% of its properties outright. That's why these brand companies can grow so fast. They're not limited by how much real estate they can afford to buy. They just keep signing up new owners who bring their own capital. The brand grows its footprint and its fee stream without funding a single new building. For investors, that means higher margins, stronger cash flow, and far less exposure to the messy, cyclical reality of actually running hotels. So the picture that emerges is a fascinating split. On one side, you have the owners, people making a genuine hands-on real estate bet. Big upfront costs, thin margins, real risk, but with the payoff of cash flow, tax advantages, and a valuable asset that can appreciate over time. And on the other side, you have the brands who crack the code by monetizing their name and their reservation system instead of their buildings, capturing steady high-margin fees while someone else takes the risk. Neither is a guaranteed win. Owners can lose their shirts if they buy in the wrong market or manage poorly. And even the mighty brands are exposed to travel demand shocks, recessions, and geopolitical chaos, because when nobody's traveling, a percentage of nothing is still nothing. In fact, recently, the U.S. hotel industry saw its first annual decline in revenue per available room since 2020, a reminder that even this business has its down years. So, is owning a hotel a good idea? Like everything in economics, the honest answer is, it depends. It can absolutely be profitable, but it is not passive, it is not cheap, and it is not for the faint of heart. It rewards people who understand these numbers, who obsess over that RevPAR figure, who control their costs down to the dollar per occupied room, and who pick their location like their financial life depends on it, because it does. But the real lesson here, the one I want you to walk away with, is this. The next time you check into a hotel, look up at that big, shiny brand name on the building. And remember, the company on the sign probably doesn't own a single brick of it. They just own the one thing that turned out to be more valuable than all that concrete. The name itself. If you found this video valuable, leave a like, subscribe, and comment below which business you want me to cover next.